Welcome to the Sad Boys Book Club. My name is Dusty.
And I'm Daniel.
And welcome back to Giovanni's Room. We are covering part 2, which is the second half of this book tonight. And even though it won't be uploaded while it's still Pride Month, it is still technically Pride Month while we were recording this. So once again, happy Pride Month to everybody. Hope everybody who celebrates Pride Month had a very good, very fun, very inclusive Pride Month. And sadly, due to factors outside of our control, we won't have this uploaded until July. But I hope that it's the thought that counts.
Yeah, I wish we could have gotten started with this a little bit earlier in the month, but some situations came up that prevented us. So apologies that we weren't able to get this up earlier, but you know we're very excited to cover this book for Pride Month. It's been an incredible book. I really liked this book. I'm very impressed with James Baldwin. You know, I think I said in the first episode that I'd read some of his essays and I think articles and that kind of thing, but I feel like this is like a step above the already impressive stuff that I'd read by him, and I don't know. Like I said last week, just a very smooth read, and by that I don't mean to give it like a sense of oh, this is an easy simple book. Far from it, actually. But what I mean by that is that when you read, you kind of get drawn into a rhythm. And it feels like you can read it faster, just because it's just it has such a good pace, like the timing of the beats of the plot and the dialogue, and even just the written language itself just has a propulsive rhythm through it that just draws you through it, and it's just I just can't say enough about it.
Yeah, while it may not be my absolute favorite book we've covered, not just this year, but for the entire year and a half we've been doing this, I wouldn't say it's my favorite, but I would say I think it's objectively the best.
I wouldn't argue with you on that. I mean, it's very impressive book, and I hope if anybody is listening to this to kind of I don't know, just hasn't read the book, I would heartily recommend giving it a shot.
Yeah. I feel like if I had to have the Sad Boys Book Club S tier quality books, what I would say would be our absolute S tier qualities, I would say for me, it would be Beloved, this, As Long as Lemon Trees Grow, and I don't know. I that might be it. I almost said Frankenstein, but I would feel like that would be in the A plus tier, if anything.
I mean, I don't think that's wrong. I think this, as much as I enjoyed Frankenstein and heartily recommend people read that or go back and listen if you haven't. I think this is probably, in terms of just the sheer ability of the author, this is probably number one. Anyway, I think we made our thoughts pretty clear about how we feel about the book. Do we want to go ahead and start our recap?
Sure. So the last thing we covered was where part 1 ended. Our flashback was David's first night with Giovanni in his room, and in our present time, it was the night before Giovanni was set to be executed. So, right off the bat, I gotta say, I did not expect to have an almost immediate 180 turn on my feelings towards Giovanni. I kind of hate him.
I mean, he's not a good guy in a lot of ways. I think that this kind of showed a different side of him as it went along. Because the first was he seemed very, very affectionate and kind and at least gregarious. He seemed like a decent guy, but as David lived with Giovanni, some rather grim truths came to light.
Yeah. He is not a mentally sound person.
He's just Italian.
Yeah.
That's actually I'm joking, but that's kind of one of the things that David says when people kind of like, slight spoiler here, but when he's talking with Hella, that's one of the things he says. Essentially, is like, he's just Italian. You know how they are.
Yeah. Well, he also was trying to not kind of cue her in on the whole "I'm gay" thing that was also going on.
That's also true, but I just thought it was, but it was in reaction to some pointed remarks and actions on the part of Giovanni. But I just thought it was a little bizarre that he tried to write it off as, oh, he's just Italian.
Yeah. But yeah, we do spend there's a good number of months that go by where David is living with Giovanni, and I don't know, would you think it's fair to say that Giovanni becomes emotionally abusive?
I think so. I think it's the it's at least a very emotionally turbulent relationship. I think Giovanni is very belligerent, but I think also David is very judgmental and withholding. Not to say that excuses Giovanni and his actions in any way. It's just, I think it's a very mutually toxic and kind of a pretty dark situation.
Yeah, I don't want it to come across as me implying that David is not similarly toxic. He very much is in his own ways as well. But yeah, Giovanni, man, it's like we kind of had what seemed like a mask off moment in his whole just like, oh, and it's weird with the whole I don't want to say weird. It's not uncommon, but it just was sudden and surprising for me, to where he was suddenly just like, basically, if you weren't here, I would kill myself. If you leave me, I'll be lonely again, and I'll kill myself. And I'm like, wow, dude, this is like so many red flags.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
And then there's some other comments that he makes. Maybe we'll probably get to them that are that definitely gave me pause.
Yeah. So it's pretty telling that it seems like David almost immediately is trying to find an out of the relationship. But the weird thing about it is that David's not trying to find an out because of Giovanni's words or actions. It's because of how Giovanni makes him how he makes him feel emotionally, how he makes him feel physically. Like, basically, it's just like, that boy got a body so good I gotta quit it, but I can't. And it's like, I feel like you're having the wrong takeaway from this, because it's kind of similar to it's like the Joey situation from part 1, but instead of it being like I'm just begging for him to tell me to stay, it's Giovanni is begging for him to stay, but now it's kind of like the shoe's on the other foot, and he's so desperate to stay, but he is staying, but he's also desperately trying to find a way to leave. So I that's an interesting kind of dichotomy between Joey and Giovanni and David's relationship with them. Did you pick up on that too?
Yeah, I think, that's just kind of a facet of David that he does not. We said last week that he went on this trip to find himself, and it seems like he didn't do that, because he just seems very out of tune with what he actually wants. Like, he will do things that just, I mean, he will rationalize them, but when you look at them in the abstract, this is a man that's very much adrift, and his decision making that often does not make a lot of sense.
would you also say it's fair to call David an emotional masochist?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair way to describe him.
Yeah. I really thought after finishing part one, we were gonna get this like tragic love story that has to do with like the inner turmoil between two men that love each other and are trying to find themselves. What I did not expect was the second half being a very toxic, hateful bit about a man who just it does everything wrong when he knows what the right thing to do is, and another man who is so emotionally despondent and broken that he basically ruins his own life out of spite.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to describe it. But I think it's also it's that certainly, but it's also kind of a function of having to live in a very secretive way. By
Yeah,
that I mean when you have to live in these secretive ways. You kind of feel trapped in these. You can feel trapped in these emotional circumstances, if that makes sense.
yeah, and it definitely does feel like David and Giovanni are both victims of the society that they live in and the nature in which they are unable to freely explore their sexuality and their lifestyle. And I do it lends itself to the tragedy to where instead of it just being a romantic tragedy, it's a humanity tragedy, a human tragedy, to where it's not just tortured lovers, it's just a tortured life period.
Yeah, yeah, that's certainly true. But I think it adds. There's just a bunch of layers to this tragedy, and that's one of the reasons why I think it's such a successful book. Is it shows like the intersection of personal tragedy and societal tragedy,
Yeah.
and how they kind of act on one another.
Yeah. And so one of the things we learn, I think this happens. Yeah, I think this is the conversation. I think this is during the conversation that they have after Giovanni gets fired from Guillaume's bar, which, as I understood it, it was a situation where Guillaume was like, "Okay, you're gonna have sex with me now," and Giovanni was like, respectfully, no, and Guillaume was like, "You're a thief," and he comes down and makes a whole scene in front of all of the crowd, and he's like, "You're a thief, you've been stealing from me, you're a terrible person, get out of here, you terrible man, I hate you, you are gone," and fires him for that, which is shitty, to say the least.
That's like that's like textbook sexual harassment.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
And I also just not to derail us, but I also want to throw in as part of that conversation, it's Guillaume kind of pushing Giovanni about his relationship with David. He doesn't like that Giovanni is in a relationship with David.
yeah. But it's in this conversation that that the two of them have, in which Giovanni's in a very drunken and feverish state, that he tells David about the life he had in Italy and what eventually caused him to leave it. We learn that he had a woman of his own. They eventually conceived a child, and the child was a stillborn. And the trauma that Giovanni suffered from his son being stillborn caused him to forsake his family, forsake his home, and kind of cast off into the situation that we now see him in, which I can't imagine helped with his mental faculties, the kind of the piling on of tragedies that led him to this point.
Yeah, yeah. And there's also during this passage that one section where Giovanni he makes some statements like talking about how he dislikes women, how he was abusive towards his wife, that really begin to like put into stark relief like that Giovanni is disturbed person, I would say, at least.
Yeah, I think the passage that really got me off the Giovanni train, so to say, was when he's just like, yeah, women, they suck, am I right? I mean, geez, it's so great when we can just smack them around to keep them in line, and I'm just like, oh my god, like, I understand that, like, how like, the patriarchal family structure worked back then, and it was just, you had your housewives and your abusive husbands and your negligent fathers and whatnot, but like just because it was the societal norm at the time does not make it any better. It makes it worse.
Well, I think it was at least still somewhat looked down on to like outright, like, obviously it was and is still very patriarchal societies in the West and really the world, but I feel like the inclusion of the thing about him beating his wife was intentional to be like, to really kind of hammer home. I think it was supposed to put him in a negative light, so I would hope that it was viewed, at least that aspect, negatively even then.
Yeah, it felt like a drawing the curtain back kind of moment.
Yeah.
Which, to kind of, show that David ain't no saint either, I really dislike that part of his, coping for, Giovanni's,
Instability?
Instability. I was going to say unstableness, but instability is a much better word, thank you. Is to just go out and fuck a woman. He's just like, I gotta find a girl. Any woman will do, except for those women. They're not pretty enough. And he just kind of, he starts gooning, like, just to
that's what I was saying, is like, he's a very judgmental person. Like, everything throughout this novel, he's always looking down on different people, and I feel like it's a lot of projection because he's not able to really square his innate understanding of his like, and I must emphasize this, wholly normal sexuality with the societal disapproval, and so it is kind of turned inward and kind of curdled. But I think it's a little too painful for him to like direct it against himself all the time, especially when he's engaging in a homosexual life, at least in the absence of Hella. And so he's kind of like projecting this sort of feeling onto others. And I don't know. I don't know if that's necessarily important to your point there, but it's just something that when he was looking at women, especially I think he was speaking at that point you were referring to some sex workers. I think that was one of the things. Like, it's when he sees these outcasts, whether it's other members of the LGBT community or sex workers, or just really anybody, but especially them, he kind of turns an especially critical eye on them.
Yeah. I honestly thought I was about to read a passage about him review bombing The Acolyte with the way that he was going. Oh man, did I just date this?
He said, "Go woke, go broke."
Yeah. So, in his gooning phase, he finally finds a woman that doesn't quite hit his target standard, but you know what? Fuck it, it'll have to do. Some other American that he apparently knows named Sue, who, as he puts it, is pretty small around the waist, pretty small around the chest, but pretty big around the waist. I'm euphemizing it. And he basically just, like, straight up, just what's the word I'm looking for here? Not prostrates himself, but, like, he's very forward. He's just like, hey, I'll buy you a drink. And then he's just like, why don't we have another drink at your place? That would be fun. And she's just like, I don't really know. And he's like, come on, let's go have sex. And she's like, fine, since you're buying the drink. And oh, it's such a sad, pathetic moment. It really is. And I really hate what he does to her in this situation as well, because, like, he really does build her up only to send her crashing right back down after they have sex. And it's just a really scummy thing to do, because she's like, oh, that was fun, I'd love to do this again. And he's just like, yeah. And she's like, you want to go out tonight? And he's like, oh, look at that, I can't tonight. She's like, what about tomorrow night? And he's like, oh, you know what? I'm just so, I'll call you, okay? I'll call you.
And what's made very clear is that she knows what's happening and is brokenhearted about it.
Yeah. So, it's not okay,
It's
man.
he very clearly used this woman, and she feels bad about it, and he feels nothing really.
Yeah, he
And
just...
it's a real bummer of a passage, but a very instructive as to the nature of the character of David.
Yeah, he strikes me as someone who wants to bring people down to his level because he just can't fathom them being above him.
Yeah, that was. I'm trying to remember. Was this was this after Giovanni lost his job when that happened?
I think, yeah, it was. I think it was. Because this
Okay.
is, he just kind of, like, left him, was this when he left him and went to Nice, like, that morning or something like that? Or was that a later thing? Oh, no, sorry, rather, no, he left Hella and went to Nice early in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
Am I saying it right? It's Nice, right? Not,
I think so.
um, but, yeah, it's a mess. It's really unfortunate, I mean, we were already shown a little bit of what kind of person David was in part 1. I was really hoping that Giovanni would be a step for him to come to terms with who he is and find acceptance with it and embrace who he is. But it seems like that really didn't happen. And that's, I think, what makes this book a bigger tragedy than what I expected it to be, is because I really don't feel like David learned anything by the end. He just he just had a couple of more bad things happen to him, and he's still just this lost, confused man by the end that just doesn't really know who he is or what he wants, but he knows.
I know we said that, and even I said that too. But I'm kind of wondering, maybe he does know what he wants, but at the same time, he feels like that's totally foreclosed, because do recall at the very early part of part 2 where he's still kind of in the semi honeymoon phase of his relationship with Giovanni. And they're talking about they're talking about Hella, and that she's going to be coming back, and he's kind of Giovanni's like, oh well, why don't you just break up with her and find someone else, that kind of thing, and that kind of, so how to put this? I'm kind of losing the plot here. It becomes essentially that slowly becomes like an argument, and he points out that homosexuality is a crime in the United States, and that's I think that's kind of it. Like, is like he, as a person from the United States, even though he looks down on other people from the United States, he's kind of still locked in that sort of American mindset where it just can never. This what he's experiencing. He perceives as good and normal and natural and what he wants, but he just can't allow himself to live in that because, I mean, for an understandable reason, like he's the situation would be pretty much untenable, from his perspective, living with like the accumulated centuries of social and cultural dogma, and just the lack of ability to break out of that, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think also during this section he talks Giovanni is still essentially he still wants to see, even though he knows Hella will be returning, he's still pretty much like, well, I mean, I don't really see why that's a problem. We can still see each other, and so that's kind of like this emerging situation, is like this tension between Giovanni wanting to stay together and like seemingly in a very like I don't want to say misguided, but like incredibly idealistic way. He just can't imagine this representing anything than like a major potential major rupture for either his relationship with David or David's relationship with Hela.
Yeah, and I guess credit where it's due. David never lies to Giovanni. He's always pretty upfront with him about the whole Hela situation and how he's like, we're going to get married and we are going to leave France eventually and probably go back to the United States. He's pretty upfront with him. It's Giovanni is the one that's trying to try and convince him otherwise and try to like convince himself as well that things can be different.
I think that's a big part of it, and I think there's also a little bit of that sort of emotionally abusive aspect. I mean, obviously, no one wants to hear that as part of the relationship, that the relationship has an end date. But especially in this context where David is trying to make it clear, what the limitations on his life are and why this can't work, and Giovanni is really not engaging with it. He's just kind of like, no, you're wrong. He's not really, you know what I mean? He's not really acting in a way that's like he's validating, David's concerns. He's just like, no, it's just fine. You just stay with me and everything will be fine.
Yeah,
essentially.
Yeah, he's selfishly brushing him aside. There's one interesting little occurrence as well before we get into Hela's return. And it's so Giovanni is really becoming a mooch as well at this point. Every day he's asking David if he's messaged his father about sending more money because they're running out of money all the time. He's borrowing money from Jock again, and he's going to the American Express, and he's lying. This is actually the time that he is lying to Giovanni, saying that he did write his father, and they're just kind of waiting for it, but he actually hasn't written his father and asked for money. And he's going to the American Express to check his mail because I guess that's where he gets his mail. And there's an occurrence where he's like leaving after he gets a letter from his father and from Hela, and his father's basically just like, stop keeping secrets from me, please. I'm not trying to keep your money from you. I just want to make sure you're not coming back to nothing. I'm worried about you. Come home. And he sees this sailor. It has to be a relatively young man. And basically he just kind of gets lost in the swagger that this dude kind of exudes. It's in one hand, it's partially because of like his youth. It's another way, and another reason is because of how he holds himself. And he's looking at this man, and he's wondering. He's like, was my father ever like this when he was younger? Was I ever like this when I was younger? And there's like this deep kind of jealousy in what he's kind of putting onto this sailor, like this life that he has kind of constructed for him. At least that's how I took it. Like this, how it's like this sailor, he's ostensibly has like all of these things going for him. He's handsome, he's confident, and with him being a sailor, he's got somewhat of a career and a future ahead of him. And I think David at this point is, at least this is how I interpreted this, so please, if you had something different, by all means, let me know. But it's like he's looking at him and he's seeing, on the one hand, his loss of youth because he's almost 30 now, and 30 is basically a death sentence back then. And he hasn't done anything. He doesn't know who he is. He doesn't know what he wants. He's only kind of pretending that he does. And he just sees this young man who, as he sees it, has more than him. And it creates this kind of like, not so much a lust for him, like sexually, but like a lust for what he's lacking. And the sailor sees him, they make eye contact, and the look of contempt that the sailor gives him reminds him of the look of contempt that he must have given to who was it that to Jacques. Okay, that's what I thought. That he's like he thinks that it reminds him of the looks that he must have given Jacques, that disgust and contempt. And it definitely feels like a another kind of masochistic moment for David, a kind of like an emotional self-harming.
Yeah.
I don't know, how did you take it?
Pretty similarly. I would regard it as as pretty similar to that. Although I thought there was a little bit more of an actual lust in there, but I mean, I might need to reread it.
Yeah. I mean, it's possible it was.
Especially in light of the comparison of himself to Jacques, you know.
Yeah.
I thought that was probably.
Which I'm wondering if him and the interactions with the sailor near the end of the book have any relevance to this. Like he specifically chose a sailor because of this interaction.
Could be.
And so now Hella returns. She's been visiting Spain. She's been sending letters. She's been hanging out with some English family, and they show her. I think it was like a bull run or it was a bullfight. They show her a bullfight. Yada yada. She has a fun time with them, and then now she's coming back to Paris because she wants to be with David. She's made her decision. She wants to be with him. They are about, I guess, as close to officially engaged as you can be, and David ostensibly sneaks out to go to basically meet her at the either, I don't remember if it's the train station or the docks. I don't remember if she came on. I think she came on a boat, but it might have been a train. I don't really remember. It's not important. And he so he there's a really great line that it really kind of stuck with me, and it was when he sees her. He says that he realizes that he loved her just as much as he did before, but he's still not sure how much that really is. And it to me it feels like he's trying to fill the hole in him with Hella, and he's like holding her, and he's making a comment to himself about how like she fits perfectly in his arms, and she always has. And it's to me it's just this really desperate trying to fit her into the whole of his life, trying desperately to make her fit, and trying to convince himself as well as us that she does. But what we're going to see is that really, and what we've already seen, is that that's not at all true. So they spend a couple days together. He's never leaving her side. He's constantly trying to be close to her, both like physically, sexually, emotionally. He's clinging to her. He's being extremely clingy, and he hasn't gone back to Giovanni. He hasn't talked to anybody about it. They're just constantly with each other. And he mentioned as much to Giovanni as well during their time together, that he's desperate to get out of Paris because there's a whole bit where he's talking about the filth of Giovanni's room, and how Giovanni made a callous kind of joke about how the trash of Paris gets thrown into his room, and that's why his room is so messy. But I think it is the small trashiness of that room that feels stifling to David that is what really kind of pushes him to want to get out, to want to leave at first. And it's kind of the symbol of what that room represents for them, because Giovanni is ostensibly trying to make him, as he sees it, into the housewife, while Giovanni is the big strong man who goes and makes the money, and David is the one that cleans up the room. And so I think for him the room is a sort of prison, a kind of mental prison for him, that leaves him kind of trapped in this relationship with someone who he does love, and he also has said that he will never love anybody like he loves Giovanni. But it's oppressive to him in the way that he feels like he should not be oppressed. It's I don't know. I feel like he's doing a lot of mental gymnastics here. Granted, it is a filthy, disgusting, terrible room, and they do need to get out of there. But I think the metaphor he creates for it is just a way of him trying to have I think it's part of this internal struggle he has about who he is and who he loves, and why it's okay that he should love them, but the battle with himself as to why it's not okay. And so we do see bits of this whole him wanting to leave Paris with Giovanni, and this is expanded upon even more with Hella, how he's saying, he writes his father a letter saying, hey, the reason why I've been secretive to you is because I did indeed meet a girl, but we're gonna get married, but we're gonna get married here, we're gonna have our honeymoon here, and then we'll come back, so please send me money because I need it for me and the girl things. Um, but so they decide when we get the money, we're going to leave. We're gonna go like south somewhere, get a house or something. Kind of deal with our things, do our thing, and then spend our time here, and then we'll go back to America afterwards. So that's kind of the plan he's really trying to push to get out of Paris. So they're kind of doing their own thing one day. They pass by this bookstore and she makes a comment about, "Oh, hey, there's a book I want to get. Let's pop in real quick." And they pop in and she's looking around and he runs into Jock, who's there looking at the magazines, and he's like, "Oh my God, we haven't seen you. Giovanni's been so upset. He's been combing through the rivers looking for your body. Like he thought that you might have gone and done something stupid, and in fact right now he's off trying to call the hotel that he knows that Hella is staying at, and yeah, so not the nicest move to do for sure. He really did just kind of ghost him, but yeah, Hella comes up and she's like, "Oh, hey," and he's like, "Oh, hey, Jock, Hella, Jock, you met," and we know that Hella does not like Jock at all, and so she's just kind of trying to be polite as best as she can, and meanwhile, David is desperately trying to get out of the bookstore before Giovanni comes back, but immediately Giovanni comes back and he's very angry. He's like, "Where have you been? I've been so worried." Just very upset about the whole situation, and David very casually, much to his own surprise, turns around and he's like, "Oh, hey, Giovanni, this is my fiance Hella. This is Giovanni," and there's like a very there's a lot of tension because he's like he's trying very hard to contain himself. I feel like he's obviously he's very angry, but he's doing a not the best job of hiding that. But he's trying to be at least somewhat cordial to Hella as best as he can. And then Jock is just like, "Oh, come and have drinks with us. It'll be, we should really sit down and have a chat, the four of us." And Hella she's just like, "Oh, look at the time. I haven't barely had any rest since I've got here. I really must go. I'm not feeling very well." And David's like, "Oh, I'll walk you back to the hotel, and then I'll come and meet you guys for drinks." And then he doesn't do that. He takes her home, and then they just they have another night together. They're chatting. They're looking at they're laying in bed together, staring up at the night sky or whatever. And he once again ditches them, which once again not very cool. But he does go. He's like, "I need to go back to the room and get my stuff." And what he tells her is he's been living with Giovanni for the last couple of months. That that he was a roommate. He was helping him just kind of because he ran out of money, and he's like, "Oh, he used to have a mistress and a job." And she's like, "What happened?" He's like, "Well, he lost both of them." And he's really trying to. It's kind of weird because he's trying to defend Giovanni to her because he's like, he really is a nice guy. But he's also like really, he's not doing him too many favors either. He's just kind of not painting him in the best of lights.
I think it's also because at this point he's pretty down on Giovanni himself.
Yeah, but like he's doing everything he can to really not bring attention to what the relationship actually was. And he's like, I love Giovanni. He's a good dude. He's I care about him a lot. But yeah, he's just, I don't know. He's almost kind of Joeying him with her almost. But yeah, the next day he goes and he gets his suitcase from Giovanni's room, and they have what is ostensibly their final conversation. And yeah, he is Giovanni's drunk. He's upset, and he's just eventually he just kind of gives up, and he's just like, fighting. There's no point in fighting. You've already made your decision. There's nothing I can say. If I could, if I could chain you, if I could like keep you here, if I could beat you and make you stay, which by the way is just
again very dark.
So many red flags there. Oh my god. He's like, I would do that if it'd make you stay, but I know it won't. And then in just probably another one of the many bad decisions that David makes. He decides to stay there that night and leave in the morning. And I'm like, dude, like, why? This, like, Giovanni is, like, so not good for him. But he stays that night and he leaves in the morning. And they have ostensibly their goodbye, and he goes back to Hela. And for all intents and purposes, that is the end of their relationship as we know it.
But it's not the end of his observation of Giovanni.
No, there are a lot of kind of running into each other moments throughout the next bit. It seems like he's gotten with Jock. He's dressing more lavishly. He seems to be with Jock a lot. And then there's eventually that seems to stop. And
I will say, he also, because he's angry and conflicted about the relationship and the way how it's ended, he also starts to turn the sort of judgmental eye on him and says some unflattering things about him when he sees him.
Yeah. So they're both kind of being like scorned lovers right now. And but yeah, eventually he notices that Giovanni's not running with Jock anymore. He's running with this guy named how would you say it? It's Yves.
Eve,
who is one of the boys from the bar from the night that they met, that either Jock or Guillaume was flirting with. He's running with him now, and he's looking a little more kind of rugged and roguish, I guess. And David actually runs into Eve at some point, and he mentions that Guillaume is willing to offer Giovanni his job back. And that, needless to say, does not end well. So we learn that Giovanni did indeed go back to Guillaume, and the next day Guillaume is found dead, having been strangled by his own scarf. And now there's a manhunt for Giovanni because he is the prime suspect. And we learn that realistically it is very much more than likely Giovanni. And we have is it here or is it after Giovanni is caught and arrested where David starts to resent Hela and her body?
It's a little bit. I think it's a little bit after this, but also I want to just mention briefly. We don't have to go through it because we don't know if this is true or not. But David basically has like this. I don't want to say premonition per se, but he's like he's thinking about Giovanni, and he's afraid for him. He's concerned about what's going to happen to him, how he's doing, and all that. And he reconstructs this narrative in his mind about how things must have transpired and how Giovanni came to kill Guillaume.
Yeah,
and I don't know how important that is because again, this was just him kind of speculating, but it does show that he does love Giovanni in a way, but it's a very sick love, if that makes sense. I don't know quite how to put it, but I just thought it was important to talk about how throughout this section there's a lot of him thinking about Giovanni and thinking about all these things, and it kind of coincides with what you're saying, where he starts to become disgusted with Hela, and it's just, I don't know. I think it's kind of part and parcel because he's just kind of ruminating, and he's just obsessively thinking about Giovanni in this moment, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know why he's doing this to himself. I don't know if it's some form of like trying to cope or try to rationalize or something. But it definitely doesn't feel healthy what he's doing.
Well, there's that emotional masochism,
Yeah.
as you mentioned.
Yeah. Then eventually Giovanni is found. He's found with the money that was stolen from um, Guillaume.
Guillaume.
And he confesses to it, and he's taken and he's arrested, and yeah, David's like reading the news, he's learning about it. He's like waiting for the trial, and he's kind of sinking a lot. A lot of what he's doing with Hella is very much just kind of going through the motions, and yeah, he starts to kind of resent her. He talks about how he finds her body grotesque. He wishes that she was firmer and more masculine. He shies away at her touch, and it's just really it's really not great for a number of reasons. It's not fair to her. He's not okay. But this all kind of culminates in he one morning he wakes up before her, and he just kind of leaves her, and he sneaks off to Nice, and kind of goes on his drunken stupor, finds himself a sailor, and stays with him for it's like a night or two. And one night he's standing by the mirror, and he thinks he sees a vision of Hella, and he turns around, and there she is. She's tracked him down, and so she's kind of, I don't want to say caught him in the act, but it kind of is what it is. I mean, he really did just kind of leave her high and dry. And she's just like, I always kind of knew, I think, but it's the she can't really handle the lies, and so they go back to their the little house that they're living in, the house that he's at in the present day. And she's done. She's like, she's basically just like, you've ruined men for me. Every man I see will remind me of you. And she's just very, she obviously she's upset, and she kind of realizes that this is also kind of what was going on with Giovanni. This is why he's been acting the way he was with him. And she's just done. She's going back home to Minnesota, and she's leaving him. She's just done. And it's like, I can't really blame her. The man that she thought she loved was, I mean, let's be real, was a lie. That was the biggest lie that he told her. And like, the thing that frustrates me the most about this, because she didn't deserve this. She didn't deserve this treatment. She deserved the truth from him up front to begin with. Is he's like, I wasn't lying to you. I was lying to myself. And any pain that you caused, I didn't mean to do. And it's like, okay, dude, like, you can't say sorry to the vase after you broke it, Like, Pandora's box is opened. I do believe that he had no intention of hurting her, but that doesn't change the fact that he did everything in his power to hurt her.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really tragic. And one thing that is kind of interesting in this portion of the novel is that as they're going through the stages of the breakup leading up to this point, she's talking about putting aside her dreams and her sort of sense of self as an independent woman, because she's trying to do, in a very tragic way, anything she can do to kind of salvage the relationship that's, falling apart. And she starts to speak in this way that's kind of shocking, because earlier on in the novel she's like the equivalent of of someone we would consider very independent minded or something like that. And then by the end she's just trying, she even will use these patriarchal platitudes just because she's trying to convince him to stay, because she can feel him pulling away. And also, in the actual moment of their breakup, she does not throw his sexuality in his face.
It's just the lies.
She's obvious. Yeah, it's the lie. She obviously does not feel. She's sad because of all of this, the way that she's essentially been lied to. But she also in a very pointed way she's not like, abusing him for his sexuality, and I think that shows that she really was a very, if there is a good, an unambiguously good person, it was probably Hela in this novel.
Yeah.
Again, not that there's anything, well, you know what I mean. It's just like, I feel like a lot of people in that time period would use that, especially someone from America would use that to be as maximally hurtful as during the breakup. If,
Yeah. So yeah, she leaves. He's now left alone. And the rest of the book is just him kind of floating through, waiting for Giovanni's execution date. He's in a even worse state of self-loathing. And there's a bit here at the very, very end of the book where he's imagining what Giovanni's going through that morning, the morning of his execution, and he's just kind of playing it out in his head, and it's very all over the place, because it's like things like he's walking, or they're dragging him. He's praying, or he's crying, or he's calm, and it's just him trying to go through all of these different permeations of what can be going on with Giovanni. And he's like, it's happening right now, or it's already happened, or it hasn't happened yet, and it's just it's a very sad passage. It just, to me, it feels like him trying to come to terms with what's happening, and try and find some way to cope with it,
and failing.
Yeah. And we have the end of the book here. It's morning. He's leaving, and he's going home, and he has the letter that Jock sent him, the blue envelope with the letter that has the date of Giovanni's execution. And at the bus stop, he rips it up and casts it into the wind. But as he walks away, some of the pieces find their way back toward him. And man, if that isn't a good metaphor for this book, I don't know what it is.
Yeah, it's on par with the green light in Gatsby in terms of extraordinarily poignant metaphoric endings.
Yeah, and that's ostensibly the end of the book.
Yeah. Yeah, this book is very tragic. I was like reading through this last portion, and I was just enthralled. So I was reading it so quickly, and then when it ended, I was left with this feeling of like great and profound emptiness. And it was really something, because it's just like, I can't really see how David's life gets any better from this moment,
I don't think it does. I think what we've learned...
It's like Jacques was saying, the warning that he gave him at the beginning is like, if you don't learn to how to love and hold on to something, you're going to become just this bitter, isolated person like me,
Yeah. And it's just like the mysterious person at the bar said as well, about like, the tragedy that his life can face if he just doesn't handle it right, basically. Our little soothsayer that just kind of came and went.
Yeah.
But I think I think what happened here was he had two chances in his life for happiness. The first one was Joey, and the second one was Giovanni. And while I don't think that Giovanni was the right person for him long term because of his emotional insecurities, his toxic nature, and just the remarkable number of red flags that he had, I don't think that Giovanni would have been a healthy person for David long term. I think that Giovanni was that second chance for him to finally come to terms with and accept himself for who he was. But he ended up pushing Giovanni away and pushed himself away from that truth, and tried to hide himself in Hela. And then when he realized, after what happened with Giovanni, he couldn't do that anymore, then he just went and once again went gooning until Hela discovered him, and then he lost Hela too, which was his band-aid on the gaping wound. And so now he is Jock. He has become Jock here at the end, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It's sad. It's a real tragedy. But damn if James Baldwin does not make it a beautiful tragedy.
Very poignant. And I think he's also very, I wanted to point out that while this is a tragedy, and while there is a lot of ugliness and exploitation in this novel, I don't want to make it seem like it's self-hating. I don't want it to come off like that. In its best, in the lightest moments, when we're seeing the best version of David and Giovanni, and truth be told, even Jacques, when we see the best of them, they are good, relatively good people, or good people at heart. It's just that they've been they're just, by their circumstances, they've become, darker versions of themselves. And but in their better moments, there's a lot of light and just in beauty, like you were saying last week during the conversation in the bar, when he's kind of having his meet cute with Giovanni, as it were. It's just very beautiful and hopeful, and very the warm aspects of the human experience, and it's just and joy and all of that. It's just very sad what the cultural forces and their own personal failings have kind of pushed these otherwise good people into. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think you kind of nailed it there by saying, I do think that what this shows is that this is still part of the human experience. I know kind of one of the biggest attacks on the LGBT community is to try and dehumanize them, to make them seem subhuman because of their because of who they are. And I think that this book showing that these people, they still are human. They still have these human emotions. The all of the good, all of the bad, all the flaws, all of the merits. It's just these are people, for better and for worse.
Yeah. I mean, it's, I don't know, just an achingly sad book.
Yeah. Very, very brilliantly written. Like I said, I don't think it's a stretch to say that this is objectively the best book we have covered.
Yeah. So I just want to throw out there once again, if you have not read this book, if you're kind of listening to this as like a summary, so maybe you're doing a paper on this, and you're just wanting to get some highlights, just so that kind of what you're talking. I would invite anybody who's even a little curious to read this book, because it's beautiful, it's eye-opening, it's a wonderful book.
Yeah. Also, if you're doing that, you're doing it wrong, because we skipped a lot of things.
Well, yeah, we skipped a decent chunk of things, but I think we hit all the main spots.
Yeah, and it's a very easy read. It goes by very quickly. It only took me about 3.5 hours to read it. Very, very, very fun. It flows very well. I think I spoke to with when we were reading Beloved, how reading it kind of felt like, the way that she wrote the book was like going down a river. I think I had a very, very bad metaphor about that. But I will say, I think this book, very similarly, it has that very, very smooth and calming flow to the way that it's written, to where you just kind of keep going, and you're like, oh my god, man, I've read 20 pages already. Boy, the story is really just kind of zooming by. it's I don't know. It's very very well crafted. I don't know if that how better to put it. Just incredibly well written. Remarkable prose. Remarkable character writing. Just very very good story. I highly 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 recommend it. Everybody should check it out.
Well, I think that'll get us this time. Thank you, everybody, very much for listening. And once again, happy Pride. And we will see you next time.
Take care.